Iran, Russia and China have joined forces. They're working on creating a new security nightmare for the US. Tehran wants to build new ballistic missiles, but it's missing an important component, a chemical compound that is used to make missiles. Now, reports say China and Russia have agreed to help out. They want to help Iran. They've held secret talks with Tehran, and they could supply the chemical compound to Iran, the one that it needs. Which chemical are we talking about? It's called ammonium perchlorate, or AP for short. It's one of the main ingredients used to power missiles. Now, Iran cannot source this compound because of international sanctions. They've cut off Iran's supply. Now, help may be on the way. Reports say Tehran is in talks both with Beijing and Moscow. The name of a Russian company is also doing the rounds. It's called FKP Anozit. This is a state-owned maker of chemicals, but we cannot confirm if this company will supply to Iran. What we do know is how this chemical may be used. With sufficient quantities of AP, Iran should be able to build thousands of rockets. This includes the Wildfire missile. It has a range of 700 kilometers. Iran and its proxies have been using this missile in West Asia. It's an effective weapon. As of today, Iran does not have enough of these missiles. But when it does, it will pose a new security challenge for the West. The immediate threat will be in Ukraine. Iran has been supplying drones to Russia. Reports say Moscow could consider deploying the Wildfire missile against Ukraine. Moscow and Tehran are already trashing Western sanctions. Let me give you an example. Russia's largest carrier, Aeroflot, wanted a plane to be repaired, an Airbus A330-300. But Western sanctions came in the way. They've blocked Russia's access to Western aircraft maintenance and parts. Russia cannot access those. Enter Iran. It is happy to help Aeroflot. Iranian airline Mahan Air will repair the Russian plane. This is what Aeroflot has said. It says, Mahan Air has the necessary equipment and facilities, certificates and vast experience for this repair. And that's not all. Russia is also sending Iran oil supplies. They're using trains for this. In the last 2 months, Moscow has supplied 30,000 tons of gasoline and diesel to Iran. This was sent via trains. The export was routed through Kazakhstan and Turkmenistan. And you must be wondering, Iran itself is a major exporter of oil. Why is Iran getting diesel from Russia? Because Iran is consuming more than what it can produce at this point. Reports say Iran needs fuel for energy generation and for the production of petrochemicals. Both production facilities need natural gas and diesel. Apparently, Iran is facing a serious shortage of both. And going by one claim, Iran's daily gasoline consumption has touched 144 million liters. This is 50% higher than Iran's average daily consumption. So it has ramped up production. But most of this supply is being exported. Iran wants to keep its economy afloat, so it needs the Russian imports. Moscow and Tehran have a swap agreement in place. It works like a barter system. Both sides exchange oil and gas instead of cash. Remember, both Iran and Russia face Western sanctions. They're looking for ways to expand trade by circumventing sanctions. And a barter is a good way to do that. Another option is to avoid the US dollar. Iran and Russia are now trading in their own currencies. Moscow and Tehran have signed agreements. Besides trading in their own currencies, they are willing to integrate their banking systems. Russia's system is called Mir, and Iran has something called the Shaitab banking system. Once they're integrated, these banks in both the countries will be able to work together. They'll be able to conduct transactions seamlessly. You know, the West was hoping to contain this, but they're unwittingly pushing Russia and Iran closer to each other. And China's support will strengthen this partnership. The bad news from West Asia keeps piling on for the US. And now let's look at what's happening in the other side of the world. Brazilian President Lula da Silva is visiting China. He was supposed to go in late March, and it was supposed to be a mostly business trip. But Lula fell ill. He was diagnosed with pneumonia. Now that he's recovered, he's going first to Shanghai, then to Beijing. This man is 77 years old. And the fact that he's traveling this far so soon after recovery is significant. China knows it. Here's what they say.
China is willing to work with Brazil to take this visit as an opportunity to promote the upgrading of mutually beneficial and friendly cooperation between the two countries in various fields, and to inject more positive energy to promote solidarity and cooperation among developing countries and to jointly address global challenges.
That's a lot to unpack, but let's break it down into two major parts. One, mutually beneficial ties between China and Brazil, and two, jointly addressing global challenges. We'll start with Brazil-China relations. Lula da Silva is visiting Shanghai for an inauguration. The latest head of the New Development Bank is taking charge. This bank, the New Development Bank, or the NDB, was formed by BRICS nations in the year 2014. It will now be headed by Dilma Rousseff. She's a former president of Brazil. She took over from Lula as president in the year 2011. And now she's heading the NDB. A key ally of Lula is heading a Shanghai-based bank. And he's attending her inauguration. This is a far cry from the rocky ties that Brasilia and Beijing shared for a while. The last president of Brazil was Jair Bolsonaro. He was a staunchly anti-China leader. He tried to limit trade with China. Lula, in his previous tenures as president, has pushed trade with China. In fact, in 2009, China had overtaken the US as Brazil's top trading partner. China has been investing billions in Brazil, both in infrastructure projects and in setting up businesses. But some of that money dried up during the Bolsonaro years due to his perceived anti-China stance. Now that Lula is back in charge, China-Brazil ties are thawing.
I would like to say that Brazil has returned to the stage of world diplomacy and the center of international relations, which President Lula has paid close attention to since he took office. This visit to China is undoubtedly an important step towards rebuilding the friendly relations between the two countries. Of course, we will all defend our respective interests, but by working together, we hope to seek more development for the two peoples.
And now the yuan is flowing into Brazil, literally. The two countries recently agreed to trade in their local currencies. They're bypassing the US dollar. Does this mean that Lula has shifted Brazil's allegiance to China and that he's spurning the US? It's not as simple as that. Brazil is playing a delicate balancing game. As tensions continue to rise between the US and China, the US is still Brazil's second largest trading partner. Lula has to keep Washington happy. And that explains why his first state visit after becoming president was to the US. But these are polarized times, and a balanced approach is not appreciated in times like these. Yet Lula wants a global role for himself. So he weighed in on the war in Ukraine. This is what he said.
What does Putin want? Putin can't keep Ukraine's territory. Maybe we don't even discuss Crimea, but we'll have to rethink about what he has invaded. Also, Zelensky can't want everything he wants to demand. NATO will not be able to set itself up at the border. So, this is something we have to put on the table.
He suggests the middle path, and he's found no takers. Ukraine, of course, has rejected any compromise on Crimea, and Russia seems unlikely to accept a diplomatic end to the war. Which brings us to our second point, Brazil and China trying to jointly address international challenges. Xi Jinping has already proposed a peace plan. And Lula da Silva says the Chinese president is the best person to mediate in Ukraine.
I am convinced both Russia and Ukraine are waiting for somebody to come and tell them to sit down and talk. Why do I want to talk to Xi Jinping? Because I think China's economic importance, China's military importance, China's political importance, and China's relationship with Russia, even China's divergence with the US, gives China an extraordinary power to dialogue.
So Lula believes that China still has a role to play, even though their peace plan was a damp squib. And it's not just China that Lula is propping up. He has a list of potential mediators, including India.
China has weight, Brazil has weight. I think Indonesia can participate. I think India can participate. Let's talk to Putin. Let's talk to Zelensky. Let's talk to Biden. Let's see if we can find a group of people that disagree with the war.
sabe, que não se conforme com a guerra.
Lula's approach seems to favor a multipolar world, a world where emerging economies play a role in global diplomacy, where the world is not held hostage to the schemes of great powers. It sounds admirable, but is his choice of ally in China really the way to go about this? Because remember, as we've seen all too often, a deal with China rarely comes without strings attached. Meanwhile, the war continues to hurt people across the world. In Kenya, there's an economic crisis. People are dealing with soaring inflation and a high cost of living. The government is failing to tackle it. Now they've run out of cash. Kenya does not have money to pay the salaries of government employees. There is a major cash crisis in the country, also a public debt crisis. The government borrowed money left, right and center, so debt has soared, and so has the interest on debt. It has touched $5 billion per year, $5 billion in interest payments on domestic debt. It is 5 times what it was a decade ago. Here's a report. Kenya's future looks bleak. It is facing one of the worst economic crises. It's been hit hard by a cost of living crisis. Food prices have risen by almost 16% within a year. People are unemployed and hungry. There is growing anger. And on top of this, now there's a major cash crisis in Kenya. It means exactly what it's called. Kenya does not have enough money available. So it can't do the things it usually does, like pay salaries. Public sector employees are not being paid their dues. Civil servants, including lawmakers, did not receive pay last month. Other government workers have gone 3 months without theirs. The impact has been worse in rural areas. Experts say there are fears of major social upheaval. Threats of potential workers' strikes have been made. Notifications of boycotting work have been shared. If this happens, the country may come to a standstill, and Kenya cannot afford this. Because delay in salary payments is not Kenya's only problem. And not just the workers, county governments are broke too. They haven't received money from the center. So health and education spendings have taken a hit. But the government does not seem too worried, which is perplexing. Presidential Economic Advisor David Nadi says he has good reason. He says workers will begin receiving their salaries soon, probably by the end of the week. He blamed the cash crisis on bad timing and low revenue streams, meaning there aren't enough sources to bring money in the country. He says the situation will improve soon, which is something the government has been saying for a while now. But the crisis has been worsening. Last month, the government paid off some interest on external debts, so it was left with less cash in hand. There is also growing public debt, $72 billion of it, and a cost of living crisis. Annual inflation was 9.2% in March, well above the central bank's target. This led to weeks of protests in the country. And all this as the Kenyan shilling weakens. Its exchange rate is tanking to historic lows. This has pushed up the cost of imports. About 6 million people are suffering acute food shortage. All in all, the situation is dire. But yes, one can call it bad timing. Kenya's economy is racing towards a cliff and racing against time. 2024 could be a crunch point. There is strong and ongoing support from the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank. The country has a $2 billion euro bond, but it expires next year. It needs repaying. Kenya is trying to come out of this. If redeemed successfully, pressures can ease for Kenyans. But the government is not sure when the cash crunch will be resolved. And the people are not sure if the government is doing enough to resolve it. Because the economic pain is intensifying, Kenya resembles a loaded but slow-motion train wreck. Coming out of this will not be easy. Time for Vantage Shots, images that tell the story. We're starting with the US. A major wildfire broke out in New Jersey. Only about 10% of the fire has been contained. In Colombia, a volcano is on the verge of erupting. Authorities say the volcano is unstable and there is an increased seismic activity. Parts of Syria are flooded. It is getting difficult for children to reach their schools. And now, what makes April the 12th a significant day? Let's take you back in history. On this day, the first ever human went to space. The year was 1961. Russian cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin became the first human to orbit the Earth. The flight lasted 108 minutes. With this, the era of human space flight began, and the Soviet Union beat the US to it. We're leaving you with this. Thanks for watching. We'll see you tomorrow. The US and Russia are dangerously close to an armed conflict. This year, 2023, New Delhi will be the capital of global diplomacy. For a country as diverse as ours, with 88% of the population illiterate, it was a very big deal to write a constitution, and that too, the world's largest. Meanwhile, if we may, here's a Republic Day gift from India for the BBC. A list of suggestions for the BBC for their upcoming documentaries. Number 1, the Kohinoor and the colonial loot. Number 2, an outdated monarchy and unhealthy obsession with the royals. Number 3, racism in 2023. We're waiting.